Have you ever wondered why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly, while others struggle with money for their entire lives? Two people can start in the exact same place, same salary, same opportunities, same number of hours in a day. Yet, 20 years later, their financial lives look completely different. One has investments, freedom, and options. The other is still living paycheck to paycheck, wondering where all the years went. And this raises a question that, quietly, sits in the back of many people's minds. If building wealth is possible, then why do so many people never achieve it? Is it luck? Is it intelligence? Is it some secret strategy only rich people know? The surprising truth is much simpler and much more uncomfortable, because in most cases, the biggest obstacle to wealth isn't the economy. It isn't the government. It isn't even the amount of money someone earns. The biggest obstacle is something far less obvious. Set of invisible habits and beliefs that slowly keep people stuck in the same financial position, year after year. And most people never even realize it's happening. But before we talk about those habits, we need to understand something important about wealth itself. Because wealth doesn't usually arrive in one dramatic moment. It doesn't show up overnight with a lottery ticket or a lucky investment. Real wealth grows quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. At first, in fact, in the beginning, it can feel like nothing is happening at all. You save a little, you invest a little, you try to be responsible with money. But the numbers barely seem to move. Your account grows, but not enough to feel life-changing. And this is the stage where most people give up. Not because wealth is impossible, but because the progress feels too slow to matter. Think about it like planting a tree. During the first few years, it barely grows. You water it, you take care of it, and yet, from the outside, it still looks small. If you didn't understand how trees grow, you might think the effort isn't worth it. But underground, something important is happening. The roots are spreading, strength is building, and eventually, the growth above the ground starts accelerating. Money works in a very similar way. The early years of building wealth are often the slowest and the most frustrating. But here's the problem. Most people never stay in the game long enough to reach the stage where money begins working for them. Instead, they fall into a pattern that quietly destroys their chances of becoming wealthy. Pattern that looks completely normal on the surface. They earn money and then immediately spend most of it. Every month the cycle repeats. Income comes in, bills go out, a few small pleasures here and there, and by the time the next paycheck arrives, very little is left behind. Not because they're irresponsible, but because this system is what society quietly encourages. Spend to feel better, spend to celebrate, spend to reward yourself after a long week. Over time, spending becomes automatic, saving becomes optional, and investing becomes something people say they'll start later. But later rarely comes, because life always seems to find new ways to use money. There's always a new phone, a bigger car, a slightly nicer apartment, a vacation that feels deserved after months of work. None of these things are necessarily bad, but when they happen before wealth is built, they slowly lock people into a cycle that becomes harder and harder to escape. Cycle where income rises, but expenses rise right along with it. This is something economists often call lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the quietest traps in personal finance. Because from the outside, everything looks like progress. Your salary increases, your lifestyle improves, you upgrade things little by little. But behind the scenes, something critical isn't happening. Your investments aren't growing. Your financial safety net isn't expanding. Your money isn't being given the time it needs to multiply. So, years pass, then decades, and one day people wake up and realize something surprising. Despite working hard for most of their lives, true financial freedom still feels far away. This is why wealth isn't just about how much money someone earns. There are doctors who struggle with debt, athletes who go bankrupt, lottery winners who lose millions within a few years. And at the same time, there are ordinary workers, teachers, engineers, small business owners, who quietly build enormous wealth over time. The difference usually comes down to something surprisingly simple, not the amount of money entering someone's life, but the percentage of that money that stays and begins working for them. And this leads to one of the most important truths about wealth. The goal is not just to make money. The goal is to keep a portion of it permanently, because every dollar you keep has the potential to become something much bigger in the future. But every dollar that disappears immediately resets the entire process back to zero. And this is exactly where most people, unknowingly, sabotage their own financial future. They treat income as something meant to be spent, rather than something meant to be converted into assets. The wealthy, on the other hand, tend to see money differently. To them, money is not just a tool for buying things. It's a tool for buying freedom. Every dollar saved is a tiny worker. Every investment is another employee, and over time, those employees begin producing income on their own. At first, the effect is small, but eventually, the numbers begin to grow faster than most people expect. And that's when the entire game changes. But understanding this idea is only the first step, because there are several deeper reasons why most people never reach this stage at all. Reasons that have nothing to do with intelligence, talent, or even discipline. And once you see them clearly, you start noticing them everywhere. In the choices people make, in the habits they repeat, and in the financial patterns that quietly shape entire lives. In the next part, we're going to uncover those hidden reasons, the psychological traps, the everyday decisions, and the subtle financial behaviors that keep millions of people stuck. And once you understand them, you'll start seeing wealth in a completely different way. Asterisks. Now that we understand how wealth slowly grows in the background, the real question becomes something deeper. If the formula is actually simple, earn money, save a portion, invest consistently, then why do so many people still struggle financially for decades? Why do millions of intelligent, hardworking people never reach financial freedom? The answer lies in a few powerful forces that quietly shape financial behavior. Forces that most people never even notice. The first one is something psychologists call short-term thinking. Human beings are naturally wired to focus on immediate rewards. A delicious meal today feels more real than financial freedom 20 years from now. New gadget today feels more exciting than a larger investment portfolio decades later. And companies understand this perfectly. Entire industries are built around encouraging people to prioritize the present over the future. Advertisements rarely show someone patiently investing for 30 years. They show instant pleasure, instant upgrades, instant happiness. So the brain begins to associate spending with satisfaction. Saving, on the other hand, feels like sacrifice. And when those two feelings compete, most people naturally choose the option that feels better right now, not realizing that this one small habit repeated over decades can quietly erase millions of dollars in potential wealth. But short-term thinking isn't the only obstacle. Second reason, many people never become wealthy is something surprisingly simple. They underestimate the power of time. When people imagine building wealth, they often picture dramatic investments or lucky breakthroughs, a huge stock pick, a sudden business success, a moment where everything changes overnight. But real wealth rarely looks like that. Instead, it grows through something far more boring and far more powerful. Consistency. A person who invests a modest amount of money every month for 30 years often ends up far wealthier than someone who waits for the perfect opportunity that never arrives. Time multiplies money in ways that are difficult to appreciate until decades have passed. And this leads to the third reason wealth often remains out of reach. Most people start too late. In your 20s, retirement feels like a distant concept. In your 30s, life becomes busy with responsibilities. In your 40s, expenses are often at their highest. And, suddenly, time feels much shorter than it once did. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The earlier someone begins investing, the less money they actually need to invest overall. Because compound growth needs one thing above all else: time. Without time, even large investments struggle to grow dramatically. But, with time, even small investments can become surprisingly powerful. The fourth reason many people never build wealth is the belief that higher income will eventually solve everything. People imagine that once they earn more money, saving will become easier. But, in reality, the opposite often happens. When income rises, lifestyle tends to rise with it. The car becomes slightly nicer, the apartment becomes slightly larger, vacations become slightly more expensive. None of these upgrades feel dramatic on their own, but together they slowly consume the additional income that could have been invested. Which is why some people earning modest salaries quietly build wealth, while others earning six figures still feel financially stressed. The difference isn't income, it's how income is used. Then there's the fifth reason. Wealth remains rare. Fear. Investing can feel intimidating. Markets move up and down. News headlines constantly warn about crashes and recessions. For someone unfamiliar with investing, this uncertainty can feel overwhelming. So instead of learning and starting slowly, many people avoid investing entirely. They leave money sitting in low-growth accounts for decades, missing out on the long-term growth that historically drives most wealth creation. The sixth reason is comparison. Modern life constantly exposes people to the lifestyles of others. Social media shows expensive vacations, luxury homes, designer products, and the illusion that everyone else is living comfortably. This pressure can quietly encourage people to spend more just to keep up, even when those purchases have little to do with their actual happiness. But perhaps the most important reason wealth remains rare is the simplest one of all. Most people never decide that building wealth is truly a priority. They work hard, they pay their bills, they hope things will improve over time. But wealth building requires something slightly different. Intentional decisions. Choosing to save before spending. Choosing to invest consistently. Choosing long-term freedom over short-term upgrades. And when those decisions are repeated month after month, year after year, something remarkable begins to happen. Money starts behaving differently. Instead of disappearing as quickly as it arrives, a portion of it stays. That portion begins to grow. And slowly, almost quietly, financial momentum begins to build. At first, it's barely noticeable, but eventually the numbers start changing faster. Investments begin generating returns. Those returns begin generating their own returns, and the entire process starts accelerating. This is the stage where wealth stops feeling impossible and starts feeling inevitable. But only for the people who stayed patient long enough to reach it. Which brings us to one final thought. Becoming wealthy isn't about being perfect with money, it isn't about predicting the market, and it isn't about making one brilliant financial decision. More often than not, it's simply about avoiding the small mistakes that quietly keep most people stuck. Spending everything you earn, waiting too long to start, believing that income alone will solve financial problems, and underestimating the quiet power of consistency. Because, when those mistakes are removed, the path to wealth becomes much clearer. It becomes a long game, a patient game, but one that rewards the people who understand it. And years from now, when time has done its work, the difference between those choices can become extraordinary. Which means the real question isn't whether wealth is possible. The real question is whether someone is willing to play the long game long enough to see it happen. And that decision quietly begins today.